Welcome to the Asialink podcast. My name's Jim Gawley, and I'm delighted today to be joined by my colleague Stephen. We're going to be hearing a bit from Stephen. In the program, we'll be going to Myanmar and have a focus on our partners there. Today, we're also going to hear about our new book that Asialink has just recently published. Stephen, would you introduce yourself to the audience?
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here and first time on the podcast. I've been part of the team at Asialink for quite a few years now. Big part of my role is communications, so keeping an eye on all the news that comes into us from Asia and also trying to keep abreast online of what's going on in Asia as well. One of the more fun parts of that part of my role is you never know what you'll come across that is interesting or quirky or catches your eye. I remember coming across at one point images of these huge rubber ducks floating down the Mekong in Southeast Asia, which is quite an image. Give it a quick Google if you want to see some huge rubber ducks floating down the Mekong. But yeah, glad to be here. Asia is a fascinating place, and hopefully you'll find today's episode interesting as we think and talk about Myanmar.
Myanmar, we've been involved with for a number of years. The main place that we are involved with is something called the Myanmar Center for Church Planting. The MCCP, for short, began in 2005, so that's been going about 21 years now. Asialink began an initial partnership with the father of the guy who is our main partner in Myanmar. Obviously, we keep a lot of our names anonymous for security purposes, and he's overseeing the center. And that's based in Yangon, which is the biggest town in Myanmar, not the capital. In former days, it was known as Rangoon.
Am I right in saying, Jim, that did Yangon, did it used to be the capital?
Yeah, that's right. So Rangoon was where the British had their capital, but the military, who we'll get to meet in a little bit, they created one of these new capitals. Like you get these new capitals in a number of countries away from the main city for various reasons, and that's Naypyidaw. So that's a real quiz winner for you. What's the capital of Myanmar? Naypyidaw.
High score on Scrabble as well.
Yeah, pretty high score on Scrabble, but it's one of these places where you go down the streets of Naypyidaw and you got sort of these 6-lane highways, and there's no traffic on them, like the odd car going through. I'm not saying it's completely a ghost town, but it was planned on this epic scale, but clearly it hasn't been filled up yet. So it's just one of those kind of weird places where you go to Yangon, which has been built up over the years organically, like a lot of cities, and it's pretty busy and very different place. So the center itself is out there on the outskirts of Yangon. I visited that back in 2019. It was actually my first trip with Asialink that I went to and saw it in its state then, although it's grown since then.
Before we hear a little bit more about MCCP and the really important work that they are doing, of course, we're talking about Myanmar here, but there may be people who aren't actually totally familiar with that as a name of a country, because Myanmar, similar to how Yangon is no longer the capital, Myanmar wasn't always called Myanmar.
That's right. So when we're talking about Myanmar or Myanmar, I think the Australians like Myanmar. Some Brits, I think, are Myanmar. I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. It used to be known as Burma. Certainly under British rule, it was Burma, well known as Burma, and any Second World War buffs will be familiar with the Burma campaign and all that, very famous for that. In fact, there's a big war memorial in Yangon, or just on the outskirts of where many of the British dead are. Myanmar is in Southeast Asia, and it's a place with a very troubled history, and our partners are operating, as Stephen's already alluded to. Our partners are always operating in that kind of a context. You can't absent yourself from that context. In fact, since gaining independence in 1948, really there hasn't been a time without civil war in Myanmar.
That's a long time to be enduring conflict for local people, and there at different times throughout the history since the Brits left, there's been times where it seemed like peace had arrived and a new dawn had risen and there was a bit more of a hope for the place, but a military coup took place and it's been back to military rule again. Is that right, Jim?
What you had is military rule. Suddenly, from 1988, there was a bit of a movement for democracy that was squashed very, very firmly. But then by 2015, you get Aung San Suu Kyi, the National League for Democracy. They are overwhelmingly voted in, and she's allowed to rule. I think that's the best way to put it, by the military from 2015 up till February of 21. And the military never gave up full control, really. But to cut a long story short, yes, the military, what's known as the Tatmadaw, regained control of the country. There was lots of protests, a strong crackdown from the military at that time, and they have remained in control. And since April 2026, there was recent elections just at that time. General Min Aung Hlaing, apologies for probably not pronouncing that absolutely correctly, but he's the president and supreme commander of the military. So that is a perfect example of a military dictatorship. And by the way, he led the 2021 coup, so he clearly has control of the country. The United Nations Human Rights Council have called for investigation and prosecution of him and other top military generals for alleged genocide against, for example, the Rohingya people, crimes against humanity, and so on and so forth, and against a lot of our Christian brothers and sisters as well, it must be said.
Next month in our next episode, we're going to be talking about a different partner to MCCP that does a lot of work with people who've been affected by this ongoing conflict, and we'll maybe think a little bit about the kind of the ethnic aspect of that because there's lots of different people groups in Myanmar, and some of them have really been a target of the Tatmadaw and the military rule. So we'll probably focus on that a bit next month. But suffice to say, Myanmar has a very troubled history, both in its days as Burma and in its days as Myanmar. A lot of conflict, a lot of division, and of course, like anywhere else in the world, the place in desperate need of the gospel. Like most of Southeast Asia, it's a Buddhist country.
It is. The statistics are that it's 88% Buddhist, and the ethnic group that's the largest are the Bamar people, which is where you get the word Burma from. The Bamar people. They're 68% people. There's also there's a saying that's well known, which is they say to be Burmese is to be Buddhist, which is very unhelpful because, of course, it seems to imply there's no real place in that country for those who are not ethnically, well, who are not Buddhist. And that creates difficulties for the Christians, who are 6.2% of the population. The country has a central river going through it, which is the Irrawaddy, famous river. But then that's the central sort of lowlands. But then around the ringing that, all sides, you've got these mountains and hill tribes who live there, and different ethnic groups who live in those hill tribes. But those are people like the Kachin, the Karen, the Chin, and these are predominantly Christian peoples. And that's where a lot of the conflict is, often between the ethnic Burma and the others. However, it's not quite that simple. There are also Burmese who are opposed to the military. So it's a tangled situation, and our Christian brothers and sisters do get caught up in it. Just to give you one example, is back in April 2025, a pastor was among 13 people killed in Chin State during 2 nights of attacks by the Tatmadaw, the military. Just one example of many. And then, of course, people flee the villages. Churches get bombed sometimes, and people have to flee either into camps in the country or they flee abroad.
A really challenging environment in which then to do ministry and for MCCP, the Myanmar Center for Church Planting that we've partnered with for many years. Tell me, Jim, what's their vision? What is it that they're hoping to do? Maybe the clues in the name of them. It's about church planting. What are some of the challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, they've got a tremendous vision, which is to train pastor missionaries, and almost put them together because there's not really a great distinction there. They're training young men and women who are going out right throughout the country, and they spend 3 years in a fairly conventional seminary or a Bible school, learning the Bible, learning the teaching of Scripture, learning practical ministry while they're there as well. Then they're sent out, and they're kept in connection as alumni with the center and with our partner. So I asked him a few years back, and this may not be bang up to date, this number, but I said, how many people are out there around the country? And he said there's over 165 pastors and churches, and it's probably higher than that now, and they really are throughout the country. And so it's just tremendous to see these people being trained, being thoroughly equipped. We even have sometimes we have a pastor or two coming from here to help with that training. In fact, we had somebody from my neck of the woods went out recently on our Shepherd project to train. They have qualified teachers, teaching and doctrine, pastoral theology, and so on. And then they're responding to need as well as they set up churches, often in their own homes.
And for these young men who are out there planting churches, often among their own people groups and in their own home villages, and what are some of the challenges that they're facing? You know, you said earlier there's a feeling in the country that to be Burmese is to be Buddhist.
Yeah.
So surely there's a fair bit of opposition for some of these folk.
Yeah, there are. There is the usual hostility to the gospel that you might get. I was at a church in the Yangon Delta, and I was hearing the story of when they built the church, and the Buddhist monks had got some local ne'er do wells to be throwing stones at it as it was being built, and throwing, breaking, breaking the wooden boards of the building whilst it was being constructed, making clear their hostility. But they kept on going. You also get the ever-present danger of being recruited into the military. That's a problem for everybody, Christian or non. But young pastors, and a lot of these are very young people, young men in particular, are very liable to be picked up, press ganged, I would say, into the military. And so that's an ever-present danger. Sometimes they have to flee. There is some targeted bombing of these places, and very often Christian villages. And so they've got to deal with that. And then you've got the issues of communication. The government will turn off the internet. They'll turn off communication of phone lines. That makes communication very difficult. Think of it. You're a young pastor in your first role. You want to get that support and encouragement and advice back home, and the internet's not working. Your
Yeah.
SIM card isn't working because it's the company that's has the state monopoly, and it's basically this company is owned by the military practically.
I remember, Jim, I think reading or watching something a few years ago on this communication and internet point that not only can the internet kind of be switched off quite easily by the military rule, but the internet within Myanmar, it's not a very big internet. And I'll explain what I mean by that. For us here, there are countless websites and media organizations and all this kind of stuff, sources of information that we would access through an internet browser on our phones or on our computers. But in Myanmar, basically the internet, the entirety of people's internet is actually just Facebook. There's not really very many other websites they can access. Uh, and so all the information is kind of filtered through what people are sharing and what people are saying. And so not only might the internet be shut off, but whenever the internet is even switched on, they're relying on a social media website, where anybody can say anything and where claims and counterclaims can spread like wildfire. So even whenever the internet's up and running, it's not as if it's a great resource for people as they're trying to work out how to live under military rule.
The model that we have at Asialink of supporting Asian believers and so on, I really saw how that worked well. As a really great example was during the earthquake in, I think it was April, March of last year. And
Mhm.
it was a great example because what happened was the earthquake was somewhere in the Mandalay region, not quite Mandalay, but not far from it. And so our partner there was able to communicate directly with people who were there on the ground, very, very nearby, and could mobilize teams very quickly, getting resources to the people who needed it, people who couldn't sleep in their houses, people who needed mosquito nets, food, clean water, etc. And they could mobilize that very quickly, even as a pretty small organization. because of this extensive network. It's not a lot of people, but it is extensive, and they responded very well. And from that, I know that there were great opportunities to build relationships with people. They even were planting churches just not too far up the way from there, on the back of providing resources for people in need. So that's some of the things they're doing. They respond to need, um, way beyond where the MCC building is back in Yangon. Let me give you an example of a person, Kui Lee, who comes from Rakhine State and graduated from MCCP last year. He comes from an area where the junta have been involved in conflict with the resistance group, and there's been a lot of the people there in that community where he comes from have been displaced, and they've gone all over the place. And the church is no longer there. The soldiers have ransacked houses. The people who've been displaced are struggling to survive, and they rent small homes in the city. They're just getting by with a very small wage. And so he's now working in a church plant in a slum community, very poor area. But he's reaching out to them and sharing the gospel with them. He's seeing the Lord open small doors of opportunity for ministry, reaching out to young people, children on the weekends through games and Bible studies, and visiting the homes of the elderly in the evening, and building relationships, as well as on the Sunday gathering people together, and sharing the gospel of Christ. So that's that's an example of somebody operating in the realities of a country in civil war. And these are the sorts of people we should be praying for, to bring the gospel amidst such circumstances.
It's a remarkable story, Jim. Here's a fella who's gone to train for ministry and who had his heart set on, you know, his hometown essentially, like the place he came from. But then because of the realities of war, the realities of conflict, it's not even there for him to go back to.
No.
He's embarked on 3 years of training, and the thing that he was training for is gone. And I mean, you could easily imagine somebody becoming quite discouraged, disillusioned, and then here's this fella Kui who just goes somewhere else. And it's not just anywhere else, that he's looking after a little church among some of the very poorest.
And you know what I think, Stephen? I think it's another example, isn't it, for all of us, that we have plans, and they can be good ones, godly ones. I want to be trained. I want to serve in this place, and I want to serve these people. And even if they're good and godly desires, the Lord sometimes has other plans, and we just need to be open to that and say, Lord, okay, this wasn't what I expected. This wasn't where I expected to be going, but I'll serve you where you want me to go. And critically as well, where the people are. It's not, well, they come to where I want to be and where I think I should be. It's no, where are the people now? And the sheep have been scattered, and the pastor goes looking for the sheep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jim, thank you so much. If you want to find out a little bit more about our work in Myanmar, you can head to our website. If you just stick in asialink.org/Myanmar, you'll find a little bit more about what we're doing and some stories from some of our partners in that part of the world. As we said at the top of the show, we just wanted to highlight for you a new book that Asialink are just about to release. We've just got our hands on the first print run of it. It's a book called Sparks of Glory, and in the book Sparks of Glory, for the first time, we've gathered stories of 8 different Asian believers whose lives have been set ablaze for God. And within each of those stories that you can read about in this book, you're reading about people who are ordinary people, but who have committed their lives to serving the Lord, and through whom the Lord is doing amazing things. And in there, you're finding stories from right across the continent of Asia. There's some stories from Nepal, from Southeast Asia, from the Middle East, and there's even one in there from Myanmar, which of course we've been thinking about today. So would really encourage you to get your hands on a copy of Sparks of Glory. We are actually running a little offer at the moment on our website. If you go to asialink.org/books and make a donation of £20 or more, we will send you a pre-release copy of the book as a thank you for your generosity. So please, I encourage you, get your hands on a copy of Sparks of Glory by asialink.org/books. That's all for today. We'll be back next month thinking about Myanmar again from a little bit of a different perspective. But in the meantime, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do share it with somebody you think might be interested. Even share it with somebody you're not sure if they'll be interested. They might like it. Please do join us again next month. See you then.
Cheers for now.